Hi there, welcome back, or welcome for the first time to my look at my personal Bally Arcade Astrocade collection. This is part 11. I'm exploring box 11, which is part of the Bob Fabris Collection, part 1, or box 1, part 6. And hopefully you will enjoy this one, some of them are pretty long, and this one is another one that'll clock in about an hour or so. And I'm going to covering 5 folders in this one. One is a document about calls that takes up an entire folder, and these are calls to machine language subroutines. Then Arcadian inputs, a folder called Bally-DOS, a blank folder which contains newsletters not even related to the Astrocade, but sometimes the Astrocade is mentioned, and some letters. And then RF modulator, which has a surprise in store for me and maybe for you, because it doesn't talk about the RF modulator for the Astrocade. It talks about one for a rather rare computer system from the late 1970s. After that, I give a preview of 5 folders that are coming up in the next video, and those will be a folder called W's, which I'm not sure why it's called that because it contains letters. And the next 4 folders are called Arcade Projects, Mail, which is letters, Stuff to File, which contains articles and letters, and Insiders. These videos have allowed me to loosen up a little bit. I'm talking more off the cuff than I ever have before. And while I'm not sure if it makes the videos more fun for you to watch, it certainly makes them more fun to make. And so I'm making them more quickly, as you can probably see, as I've been uploading these rather fast within a few days of one another, when sometimes it would take me months because I would think about every moment. So hopefully you're still enjoying these videos. I've got a long ways to go to get through my personal Astrocade collection. And if you're interested in more about the Astrocade, try listening to my podcast called the Bally Alley Astrocast, or visiting my website, www.ballyalley.com. Okay, let's get started by looking at the first folder. This is going to be my 6th look at this box. I mean, I've really gone through, I think, 25 folders so far. And this today I'll review quickly what I've gone through in this box. This is box 1 of the Bob Fabris Collection. This is my 6th look at it, and I'll show you what I went through in previous videos, and then I'll show what's coming up in this video. We're going to cover more folders, but probably in less time because the folders are small. So what have we covered so far? We've covered about 25 folders that were here, and yesterday we covered 5 folders, or in the last video we covered 5 folders. Super Software, Dungeons and Dragons, Programs, which was just a few programs. It's a thick folder, but hardly anything was in there because there was a couple of programs that were thick. Letters that needed a response, and letters that had been responded to and were still going to require some time, and hopefully they'd get a response back from somebody. I'm not sure how that worked with Bob, but he kept meticulous notes, and it shows 40 years later I can still sort of know what he was thinking. So that's fantastic. What are we going to cover today? In this video, I'll be covering 6 folders. As I said a bit ago, that these are much thinner. In fact, I'll show you the 6 folders that I'll be covering are pretty thin. I mean, they're only half an inch thick. But you know me. So far, I could probably spend an hour talking about each folder, or even one piece of information in each folder. So today we're going to cover some information that was sent off to Tom Woods, I believe, and then some information about how Bob Fabris sent data from his Bally Arcade to his Apple II. I wish I knew more information about that. I wish I could have asked Bob back in the, some previous time when he was still alive, and maybe in the early 2000s when he wrote the introduction for Bally-Alley.com, how he did that and who designed it and stuff. There's some information in this collection, not in this box, I don't think, about how it worked. And let's see, letters answered, waiting reply, Arcadian Bulletin. I'm looking forward to seeing what's in there because I don't know what that means. And finally, the 6th folder is going to be keyboard schematics. And then we've got approximately 20 to 25 folders left to go through. So this box is going to be taking a bit longer. And I kind of want to focus a bit on this one, the Bally-DOS, in an upcoming episode. We'll see. RF modulator stuff, and these are going to be really fun to go through because this is stuff that was directly from Astrovision. So several years later, from this box began in right after the Astrocade or the Bally Arcade came out, and it's going to end up in about 1981 here, I think, if I recall correctly. then we're off to more boxes in the Bob Fabris collection. I feel as though my knowledge of the Astrocade scene and the Bally Arcade scene is pretty vast. I've been at it for a couple decades now, I suppose, maybe even a bit longer. And so when I'm going through these folders, I'm hoping that I'm able to add information that other people wouldn't be able to sort of get the wide view of and without maybe looking at this video or having read everything in it already. And this folder is called Mail for Tom, probably sent off to Tom Woods, just because he was someone in the community in the early days, and I'm talking about the late 1970s, who was a big person in the scene. And he would get information sent to him, and he had exchanges of letters with Bob, where he helped Bob figure out what was going on. And while the Bally Arcade was only an NTSC system, and there was never a PAL unit, it was sold overseas, in, say, for instance, in Canada, where they also use NTSC, the signal for communicating with televisions. But it was sold in, here's an example, in New Zealand. There were people in Mexico who bought it, and other, let's see where else. Obviously, I said New Zealand. And I know when I was selling my homebrew cartridges, War and Crazy Climber, there were people in Europe who bought it as well. So there's people out there who currently, and this is 2021, who play the system overseas. And then there were people back in the 1970s and early 1980s who, for whatever reason, decided that the Astrocade seemed interesting. And I'm not sure how they ordered it. If they ordered it directly from the United States and had it delivered all the way to their country, or if there was some gray market where the system was sold and they were able to pick it up semi-locally or something like that. But we're going to get started, and I want to give some attention, since I have a little bit more time, since these folders don't contain too many pieces of documentation. I'm probably going to try to read some of what's in this letter, and it is from, like I said, Auckland, New Zealand, and it is sent to, or it's from Doug Marker, and I'm going to read what it has to say, because I think I know what this is. Let's get started. He says, Dear Robert, thank you for doing such an excellent job with the Arcadian. I have been intending to write to you for some time, but just never got around to it until now. I am a computer specialist working on IBM-compatible machines. I used to be a hardware engineer, then a software engineer, and then a systems engineer with IBM. Now I work at CME, who just happened to acquire the company I was employed by. I'm presently building a PAL modulator so that I can get color. The US has a different color transmission system called NTSC, so I have to modify my Bally. Now, I've talked about some of this already, and even this letter in particular, in one of the earlier episodes of my podcast called the Astrocast, and I'm bringing it up here since I just happen to be coming across it. If you're interested in hearing more about this letter, or just more about PAL versus NTSC, check out my podcast. I think you'll enjoy it. Let's see, I've done some detailed analysis of the circuit and believe that with little modification, the RAM memory could be bumped up to 8K or 16K. And as we know, there's people brought it all the way up to 32K. In fact, 64K in a way, but I won't even get into that really. Let's see, 8K would be simpler, or 16K would overload the power supply. So he's talking about not even an external system, but nothing like that really happened. Let's see. When I have got the PAL modulator working, I will carry out the memory modification. And this here is what Bob thought was important for Tom, I believe Tom Woods, to read. He says, one project that I would find very useful would be to list all of the built-in routines in the resident ROM and the basic ROM, which eventually the source material is brought for that and found, and that was available through the Arcadian. And then you could actually get the nutting manual, so you could know how the system was supposed to be programmed in machine language. And you could explain how to call those routines. But Tom Woods was working on a project at the time where he was trying to figure out how the resident ROM routines worked. And he eventually, I don't know if he was using the source material or if he had to disassemble the ROM himself, but he was able to figure that out and get it out to the community. So I'm going to end it there, but I just find it interesting that there are people overseas who are trying to get their systems to work with an NTSC system when they lived in, I like to call it PAL land. All right, what do we got here? We have a video modulator I'm not sure if this is, doesn't say, this is from February 1977 from IEEE Transactions on Consumer Electronics. Okay, now we have the expansion unit requirements, and this was, I think, something that was going around the community at the time with people that was sort of round robin letters with Bob Fabris. And this is the home video game expansion unit requirements. Memory, 32K minimum configuration. This is what they came up with on their own, because I think even by this time they were thinking that perhaps the ZGrass expansion unit that was going to fit under the Astrocade wasn't going to come out, so they were trying to come up with their own alternative. They were hoping to have serial I/O, and I'm not going to read exactly what that meant here, but they wanted serial I/O, they wanted parallel I/O, cassette I/O at 1200 baud instead of the 300 baud, floppy disk, expansion provisions, sockets up for 32K, keyboard provisions, and finally operator signals, meaning a reliable level indicator. Okay, so let's see what actually came out for the Astrocade. Did additional memory up to 32K come out? Yes, but it wasn't as an add-on, it was through the Blue RAM and Viper. Did serial I/O come out? Yes, also through the Blue RAM and the Viper. Parallel I/O? Yes, through non-standard connections, but yes. Cassette I/O? Yes, through the Blue RAM expansion. Floppy I/O. Now that never existed on the Astrocade, kind of. There was a way, and I will be coming up to it in that Bally Arcade video, Bally DOS video folder that I will be covering in an upcoming episode. And there was at least a few people who were able to hook up floppy disks. But for the most part, there was, unless you were a tinkerer, that did not happen. Expansion provisions, like up to more sockets for memory, fully buffered 50-pin arcade bus available. I don't think that, I think he's talking about a pass-through here, and I don't think that was ever made. Keyboard provisions, yes, keyboard provisions came out. Let's see, the ROM, and the keyboard, there was a Viper keyboard, of which I only know of one person who has in the community, but it's actually quite nice. The ROM, and let's see, simple power-on monitor, ability to load 1200 or 300 baud cassette programs. Now the 2000 baud interface with the Astrocade sort of solved the slow 300 baud interface. And operator signals, so an LED, that existed, but it's talking about 8 software-driven LEDs, which I don't think ever happened. This seems to show someone really went through a lot of trouble here. So this is basically the ASCII equivalent. So they basically put it, the ASCII codes for what was in the Arcadian, or excuse me, in the Astrocade. Now, in the Bally Basic Manual, they actually had a chart that printed this, but in the early days, this wasn't easily available. And this was printed later in the Arcadian, people could figure it out. And it was useful because there were some codes in there that were non-standard ASCII. And in fact, you can see here, they have question mark, because I think it puts like little garbage on the screen. So, yeah, some things that's interesting, if you're familiar with ASCII, you'll know that there's no ASCII symbol for just the list command in BASIC, but that's something that's just not an opcode, but if you type in list, it only takes up 1 byte of memory and RAM, so that's useful. Here's some notes from Bob Fabris. These are just handwritten notes. Here is a letter to Bob from December 28th, 1979, from, I think, well, here's a check too. So there was some uncashed checks in the Arcadian, which are kind of interesting. This one was for $3, and it was probably asking for something that Bob didn't have at the time, and he was hoping to get it back in stock or something like that, and maybe he didn't follow up on it by accident, or maybe someone else did. So let's see what this person was asking. This was, what did I say this person's name was? This person's name was Charles Lawson, and his letter says, Dear Bob, in response to your request for a subscriber survey of wants and needs, the following is my Christmas list. A computer control of external devices. I'm not sure why people wanted that so badly back then, but they did. Remote readouts, not using a TV. Now, why you'd want to go in an opposite direction of using a TV, I don't know either. Continuous real-time clock readable by computer. Interconnections of 2 Bally units. Self-diagnostic cartridge. Bally bus to S100 motherboard. Memory edition, remote operating capability. These are a lot of hopes. See, this is, the more I get into this collection, I'm digging through it this way, the more I realize that people really wanted this to be like an advanced computer system, because that's how it was put forth. But, in my eyes, it's a console that has a lot of cool add-ons to it. But it didn't have to be that way. It just turned out to be that way. He was hoping for a keyboard, computer-operated control of mass storage device such as a tape, which, yeah, I mean, other systems did have that, but the advantages of it, I mean, tape is a slow, the fastest tape input that I'm aware of was on the ColecoVision Atom, and I think that was at 19.2 baud. And I mean, it was fast. It was nearly, it seems, as fast as the Commodore 64 disk drive, but you're still using a tape format, and so you had to fast forward through, like if you wanted to get to an area of the tape that you couldn't have access to immediately. Let's see. Data processing applications, computer use for electronic testing, light pen applications, and time to work on all of the above and everything else. Yeah, well, that's a lot of hopes. That's a lot of hopes. All right, that's this folder. Next, I'm going to move on to another one, and we'll get started. Here we are at our second folder for today. This one is called Bally-Apple Interface. And I have taken a look at this before, so I'm just going to read this letter in total. I was mentioning a minute ago how there was never a way to save to disk, really. But this Bally interface for the Apple did allow this to happen. And I'm going to skim a letter from Bob Wiseman, who was a very frequent contributor to the Arcadian in the 1970s. And this is from February 1981, and he talks about I'm going to skip this. He says, I, like so many other Arcadians, found the Bally to be a wonderful device, programming the sound, the color, accessing the controllers, staying up late coding one more effect. But after a while, one comes to an appreciation of the limitations. Slow execution and limited memory rule out many more elaborate schemes. It was with great anticipation that I read again and again of the impending release of the expansion module. I saved my lunch money waiting for the full keyboard, the disk drive, graphics. Mostly I just waited. A year passed and still no add-on. So about a year ago, I gave up. I bought an Apple II Plus, a wonderful, faithful device that has provided me with hundreds of pleasant hours. I have nothing but good to say about it. It is fast, it has memory, it has disk, and now I have completed the software to connect the two, meaning between the Bally and the Apple. What can it do? Store Bally programs on an Apple disk. No more cassettes to fuss with. Load programs to the Bally from the Apple. Use the Apple keyboard to enter programs on the Bally. List Bally programs on the Apple printer. The software consists of several machine language routines that are called from a basic program. The interface makes the Bally look like a cassette to the Apple and vice versa. And here's a little scheme of how it works. And I'm covering this because there's not much else in here that's going to take any but a moment to show. So I'm going to cover this letter kind of exclusively, plus then show some source code. Here is a simple diagram of the hardware configuration. Notice that no additional hardware is required. It is difficult to relate how much more quickly a program may be keyed in with this program system. Unreliable tapes are eliminated. One disk can hold a lot of programs. To simplify entry, only the first two letters of the Bally keywords need to be entered. To enter return, key in RE. I am quite excited about this. I have written a Z80 disassembler that runs on the Apple using input from the Bally. Similarly, the Apple can now access the three voices in the Bally systems and the Bally sound system. Each acts as a peripheral for the other. Now, I don't know how that would work, but that sounds pretty exciting. Because I feel that this is a quality professional product, I am not providing it to you for publication. Please run the following advertisement in the Arcadian. Apple II Bally interface. Complete Apple software listening to communicate with the Arcade cassette interface. Store Bally programs on Apple disk. Use Apple keyboard to enter Bally programs. Complete documentation, $5. And it says, I wish you continued luck with the Arcadian. My friends and I eagerly look forward to each issue. And then a moment later, well, not a moment later, so about a week and a half later, another letter comes to Bob from him, and he says, whoops, there goes a piece of paper, the PS. He says, my wife just called to tell me that the first order for my interface software arrived. It was yours. She tells me that you asked for 2 copies on tape. So basically what this ends up saying is he's not going to offer it on tape, and he's only going to sell it on an Apple disc, which I don't think has been archived, but I thought it was either in my part of the Astrocade collection from Bob Fabris or in Paul Thacker's part, but I don't think it's been archived, which probably should get that done. Anyway, he says, I am selling the source code listings. He's not selling the tapes, and here's what you get. You get 4 machine language routines, the file handler, my library of Tiny Basic, all original works, the documentation and installation manual. And it works with DOS 3.2 on the Apple. Now, then he has a... had to reach down, I dropped something on the floor there. And he has a PS. He says, if you do not have a 48K Apple, let me know, because it requires a 48K Apple, and it needs to be changed otherwise. So here's the basic part of the program for the Apple Arcade file handler. And it goes on like this. This is all in basic on the Apple. And here's an example of what is, he's got programs on the, so to check this out, this is a catalog, which is a disk directly on the Apple, of the programs for the Bally that he has on a disk. And this disk is holding 2000 AD, which is a program for the Bally, but you'll be able to load it from the Apple onto your Bally. Now, is that cool? Yeah. Look, these are all programs written for the Bally, but they're being stored in an Apple and are loaded through the Apple. Pretty cool. Then we have the documentation on how it works, which I'm not going to go into because it's way too detailed. But it's here and it's in the section. It can be downloaded. And then here's the interesting part for me. There's two interesting parts. There's a couple of them. We've got source code. So the source code is, this is for the Bally, and it says dump to Bally Arcade from an Apple II. And this is actually, if you take a look here, I don't know if you know the difference between 6502 and Z80, but this is, let's see what we have here. This is, I believe it's Z80. Yeah, this is, I think it's Z80. Yeah. I don't know if this is all of it. And it's also running from 4800. So where would that be in memory? Well, I'm not going to try to figure this out on camera, but the program continues here. And it goes on and on and on, and this is the program. So I don't know where that disk is, but if it hasn't been dumped yet, I need to find it. So here's many pages of source code, many pages of it. I'd say there's 15 pages of source material. And here's a tiny basic on an Apple II. So yeah, I probably should dig into this more. If you're into apples and you know quite a bit about the Apple, which I do not, I would appreciate some feedback if you can hunt this down. I'll try to find where this is located so you can look at it and give me some feedback, because I'd like to know about it. I was like, okay, that's all there is to cover in this folder. Let's move on. This is the third folder that we'll cover today, and it's called Letters Answered. And there's only 3 letters in here. The first one is from David Stocker, and he had some programs available, and they are, let's see, set 1 is Games 1, Games 2 and Games 3, Video Art, and Video Art 2. And most of these are just, I think he's been a member on and off of the Bally Arcade discussion group, and he said he remembers writing these. He was young. He was 15, 16 years old or something like that. So most of these are basically updates of the programs that were in the Bally Basic Manual. Not all of them, but most of them. So he basically says, please inform the rest of the Arcadians about my programs. What I now have finished is on tape that you now have. And let's see. He talks about a couple other things, what he uses. Let's see. And here we have a handwritten program. And if you ordered stuff from him, you got it in this handwriting, which is a little difficult to read, including his basic printouts, which are available on Bally-Alley.com. So I'm not going to cover what this is because it's a lot to cover, and I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to move on to our letter from Brett Bilbray. And this is, it doesn't say when, but it was probably received for, April 14th, 1979, I think. And he says, I have another correction for Simon, and he says what it is. And let's see. As I told you, many people have called in response to these errors. I am now writing to these people to help them with their other questions and problems. So, if there had not been these mistakes, I would never have contacted all of these other Bally users in this area. Also, many of these people now know of the users meeting coming on May 12th at the Computer Center. The attendance is expected to be about 50 users. Can you imagine 50 people who are Bally users getting together? This, of course, ends up becoming the Michigan Astrobugs user group, which is the biggest in the country. And it was around till, I don't know, till 83, 84. I received this month, April, Byte, and saw an article in Byte's News on page 193 about the Magnavox file suit on microprocessor video game patents, including among manufacturers that have filed suit against is Bally. And yeah, that's a subject for another day. I was going to start talking about it, but yeah, it's not unfortunate what ended up happening with some of that. Like, to this day, people still talk about that suit. and how it affected the video game industry to come. I mean, it even held sway over Nintendo, and Nintendo lost to it in the mid-'80s, late '80s. I mean, I believe they even sued Activision, and that suit is what caused Sometimes when I'm making these videos, amusing little things happen. And I have a dog. Her name is Ellie. And once in a while, you know, she makes some noise here and there. But right next to where I'm filming is her water dish. And she just started drinking her water. You might have heard it at the end of the last segment of the video before I stopped filming. And when I stopped filming and I mentioned her name, she looked at me like, what did I do? What did I do? Anyway, let me continue here. I think I was talking about how the suit against Activision actually is what caused the downfall of Activision in their mid-1980s. But that is not talking about the Bally, is it? So we will skip that. Brett goes on to say, I am sorry about the mistakes in Simon. I hope it did not cause too much trouble, but many users have learned something about debugging and a little about BASIC, sort of a learning experience. I will try to prevent these bugs from happening further. And then that's what I'm going to cover there. And I did mention this letter in an Astrocast episode. That's the podcast. And I found it neat, and I go into it in more detail there. Here's a letter from ABC Hobbycraft from April 1979. I'm not really going to cover what's in this one. He does talk about, let's see, since I see that Desert Fox is in there, and he says, is your product release data out of date, or are we getting shorted in the Midwest again? We have yet to see Panzer Attack, which was released. He doesn't say that, but it was. Let alone Star Battle. We also do not yet have Pinball, Grand Prix, Desert Fox, Music, or Checkers. Of these, so this is April 1979, and a lot of these dates, people presume these games came out right away, but they didn't all come out right away. For instance, Pinball, by April 1979, the people in Indiana hadn't been able to pick up, and this guy's and ABC Hobbycraft is a distributor, they hadn't gotten Pinball yet, Grand Prix, or these other three titles, which actually never were released. Desert Fox, Music, which is Music Maker, or Checkers, were never released. Let's see, what else he go on to? He talks about some other interesting information, and I don't think there's a back to this one, no. So, yeah, that's it. That's all that's in this one. Let's move on to the next folder. This next folder only really has one piece of information in it. This is called Letters Answered Awaiting Reply. And you'll first notice that these are some notes from Robert Fabris. He handwrote some notes. I guess he would end up typing them up and sending them off. But it's all concerning this one letter that's in here. And he actually has it labeled as hot. And I'm going to read this to you because I think it's interesting. And if I think it's interesting, it's going to be put in here. He has it labeled, as I said, hot. And that meant he thought it was interesting enough that he wanted to reply right away. I don't remember reading about this in the newsletter, but it might have been. So we have this person here, Ted Nevins, and he says, Bob, I'm a component salesman. Let's see if that's a little better. Bob, I am an electronic component salesman in Chicago. My company and another helped design and manufacture the RF modulator and the Bally game made by Midway Manufacturing Company. They are presently my largest account. I know most everybody in the software group there. I'm not very bright with machine language programming, but can probably get any information you need as to how and what ports control what. If you are willing to give my listing of what to do and how to use it. I have several Bally boards here that friends have given me. I have access to disassembled listings of the 4 proms that are in the game. If you have that, send me a copy so I can compare. We are presently using 2 2708s in a cartridge to try to find out what's going on. P.S. Please keep this confidential. Well, it's been 40 years later. He received this October, looks like somewhere in October of 1979, I'm sure. So what's interesting to highlight here is there were people diving in and helping Bob. Actually, here it says February 79, so I don't know. Yeah, phone numbers, everything. There were people outside in the community who were willing to help Bob. And his newsletter is what made that possible. And his newsletter is what makes these videos possible. And probably the homebrew scene for this system, which is small, but all the basic programs that came out, if it wasn't for the Arcadian, maybe even there wouldn't have been a cursor, I don't know. The cursor came out because the person who started that one was unhappy with what he saw in the Arcadian. But if he hadn't been unhappy with what he saw in the Arcadian, he might not have started one on his own. So it's only about 2 minutes of time to cover this footage, and folder, and let's move along to the next one. This folder is short, and I did take a look at this, so I briefly read through it. It's called the Arcadian Bulletin, and I was like, what is the Arcadian Bulletin? And this appears to be the list. This is Bob's handwriting of the people who were getting the Arcadians, which was the short-lived 5 issues of the precursor to the Arcadian. And these people would have been Sweeney and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 10 people. And then it went to the Arcadian format. So this is when it was still just a Bally user group that Bob Fabris was trying to have locally, which I guess there was one, but I don't know really anything about that. So here's what he talks about in March of 1978, or 1978. And he says, and this is the last issue, I think, of the Arcadian Bulletin. I'll just read what it says here, and I think this was covered, but in the Arcadian Bulletin, he says, "Gentlemen," and this would have been typed out on a typewriter, or I don't think he had an Apple by this time yet. The number 5 issue is at the print shop for a couple of days while I take a short business break to vacation. They should be in the mail by March 30th. 500 copies of this issue. Oh, so maybe this is actually issue number 5 of the Arcadian. So maybe what I said, I misspoke. I'm not exactly sure. Yeah, so I think, yeah, I'm not sure. There's not enough information in here unless I start really digging deeply for me to know exactly what's going on. It's a lack of information. But here's a memory dump by Patrick Scott. Don't use gives too much. I don't know what that means, but there are several memory dumps presented in the early issues of the Arcadian, so people could figure out how to use and what was in the onboard ROM, and in BASIC too. Here's another memory dump by Tracy Crook. It says answers different if even or odd, so I don't know what's up with that. Maybe these all had errors. Here's another one by Tracy Crook, load routine octal, memory dumper binary, and this one was definitely published by Max Manowski. And finally, we have one more, a memory context by John Sweeney. All right, and the rest are just notes which I don't really understand, but I'll pass through them very briefly. A note from with a serial number. This person had serial number BL-1200, serial number 1121. Yeah, so very early serial number, and some notes which I'm not too familiar with. Oh, here's a basic program, and this will be the last thing I cover, because then there's only one more page of notes. This says, this is from Max. Oh, and this is his program, the memory dumper. So last night, while I was doing some disassembling on my Bally, I came across a table of functions. The interesting thing is that I found a few new ones. Below is a list of the useful ones for the description. He says, ABS returns the absolute value, stop. Oh, so he's talking about he was disassembling the basic ROM, and he came across, these are programs that, so the original Bally Basic Manual didn't talk about this stuff, and some of it wasn't included in Astrobasic and was eliminated, but check this out. So he might be the first person who talks about what was going on and how to use these. So these are things you can type in and they will actually work, but the original Bally Basic Manual doesn't talk about these commands. So absolute subroutine or command, stop. This must be spelled out and causes execution of the program to be stopped. Call n, spell this one out also. N can be any address. This causes control to be passed to a machine language subroutine, usually with devastating results. But eventually they did understand how to use this properly, and this is what made this command that is what made basically being able to use the onboard ROM subroutines available to users. And here are a few that I find no use for. $. It is in the list, but I can't seem to make it do anything. I forget what that does. So this colon print, this appears to be a good command. I think this is how you print through the printer interface if you modify the cassette interface. And to random uses the 2 keys. I have no idea at all on this one. I don't know what that means. So there we go. And then he says, here's how here's the program I used to disassemble. So we're going to compare this to his program here and see if it's the same. That's kind of interesting. And wow, that is just amazing to me. That, let's see. They are the same. They're very similar. They are. So I think this was rewritten, but I think they're the same program basically. Yeah. So this was his program. So he would. Okay. So Max in 1979 or so, is this dated? Probably not. No one ever dated their letters. But it's definitely 1979. He wrote this program, and he would get the contents back in, wow, this one says in binary. I don't know if this one's getting the contents back of the basic ROM in binary or not. I don't know, and I'm not going to concentrate on it too much because I just don't have enough information. This is the kind of stuff if you can follow down a rabbit hole if you wanted to. And here is someone who's sharing their Wumpus program, and this is just some listings there. I'm going to end up this one. I only have one more folder to cover in this, and then I'll show what I'm going to cover in the next episode. This is the last folder that I will be covering that's new for this episode. So this is folder 6 of 6th, and it's called Keyboard Schematics. And there's only really 2 pieces of information in here, and I can't say that I understand one of them really at all, so I'll give her an overview of it quickly. And the other one, this first one here, it's a letter from April 9th, 1979. Let's bring it a little closer. And it's from Tom Johnson. And basically he finds an error in Simon. And there are a lot of program or letters to the Arcadian like this where the people write in with the fixes for programs that are errors, that program errors. And this is one of them. And actually in an earlier segment here, you notice that Brett Bilberry was talking about that. But what we have here, this is hardware, and like I said, it's a schematic. And he was curious about how many subscribers there were to the Arcadian. And in the beginning, there was around 500, and later on, I think there were 1,000 or something like that. I have the exact numbers, but I can't remember off the top of my head. And he says, I am working on an optically coupled full-size keyboard, which hopefully will eliminate most of the shift button program time. If you think that this might be of interest to others, please let me know if it's a success, and fill you in. If anyone else has anything to offer on this, let me know. Keypad wiring enclosed, and that is it. I'm going to skip that. The wiring is available on Bally-Alley.com. You can look for that. This is the one that's a little, I don't know. I don't know if everything's here, or if it is, I don't know what it is. I'm going to skip this. I'm going to skip this because this is the reply from Bob, I think. I'm just a little bit confused about this one. And it never came to fruition, unfortunately. And I don't know if it would have mattered for most people anyway. But this is someone who is working on a schematic. So this is, I believe, the Bally board. And this is the 50-pin interface. And they were trying to make it work and become a S100 interface, which, like I said in earlier videos in the series, I think some people managed to hack it and make that work. But there wasn't a lot of use to it for the Astrocade. I mean, why not just go out and buy, for instance, this is how the SD Sales Z80 CPU board worked. And this is, so that's the schematic for this. This is the schematic for the Bally. And he talks a little bit about here how it would work. And I'm not going to read it because it's way too much detail. And then here's the same information again, but it's without the detail or without the letters or the additional description. And Bob basically says there's probably some issues here. I'll basically just skim it here. He says, this is an outstanding idea with many possibilities, in theory at least. Sorry, I didn't think of it. There appears to be at least the possible problems, however. And he goes on to mention what they are. And the problems never, I think, were really overcome by anyone. Otherwise, this would have been something that probably would have, well, I was going to say taken off in the community, but I can't think of any reason why you would have wanted to use a Bally with an S100 bus. You might as well just go buy another CPM system, except I guess you would have had access to the graphics. But then again, if you had a Z80 system with an S100 bus, you could buy graphic boards for it that were in some ways superior to the Astrocade. But of course, they were more expensive. And the Astrocade, at the time of its release, was quite advanced for its time, especially considering it had a full frame buffer, which meant it had actually, unlike the 2600, which just had a line buffer, it was able to, what am I trying to say here? You basically had screen RAM, is what I'm trying to say. And they did it with some trickery, but it worked. It worked. So now let's see what's coming up in the next episodes. I wanted to give a full view of every folder that's left. I don't know if I'll be able to cover 5 folders again in the next one, because a couple of these have a lot of information in it. But what we got coming up is one called Calls. We have one called Arcadian Inputs, which I don't know what that means. I guess we'll find out shortly, because I will cover these very briefly for a minute, maybe, for each one. I've got one Arcadian or Bally-DOS, which is a way that someone hooked up a disk drive to the Bally through a Z80 computer, I believe, if I recall correctly. And a blank one, which I don't know what that is, and then finally one labeled RF modulator. So let's dig into those really quickly and see what they are, and then I'll end the video and we'll start up another video in a few days. What's coming up in the next episode are going to be 5 folders, perhaps. We will see. A couple of these folders are pretty thick. This folder is called Calls, and it's called Calls, and I think there's only one person here, and this was sent to Bob by Dieter Heinerman, and this person was, I think, someone who attended the University of Chicago, if I remember correctly. I've seen his name a few times pop up. But so it's interesting how some people will attack a problem, and I guess I'll go into that in the next episode, but I'll show you what this is. So basically he did calls to various areas of memory and wrote what happens, which is incredible, because he basically was calling in order, not random, different parts of memory and seeing if it crashed or if it wouldn't. And most of the time it would crash. Normally what you would do is you try to go about this systematically by disassembling, but he didn't. But we'll continue talking about him and his work in the next episode. Here we have something called Arcadian Inputs, and this is a very thick folder. I mean, I don't know what's in here. I mean, there's some weird, cool, fun stuff. Maybe far too much information than I'll ever cover in one episode. So we'll see. I like to aim to have as many as I can, but you never can tell. You never can tell what I'll be able to cover. But basically, it seems like it's some letters, and this is information that people found in other publications, usually, that he used as fodder for news and things like that, I think. But we'll find out. Then we have a folder called Bally-DOS, and this is not, this is by someone named Stu Haigh, Haigh. I'm not sure if that's pronounced correctly. And he ends up getting a Bally to interface directly with the Astrocade using another computer, unlike with the Apple. And his method to do it is he wrote a DOS for the Bally, and he calls it Arcadian RDOS 1.0. I kind of went into this somewhere interestingly on Bally, the discussion group several years ago now. I don't really remember the details about it, but I mean, it's amazing. Maybe I'll make a post about this on my blog, the Bally-Alley blog. But there's 15 commands, and I'll go into it in much more detail in the next episode. And this is the source code for that. So much work went into this, and I think he's the only person who was ever able to use it. 1980. I think I skipped one here. So that's one. Let's see, we've got 1, 2, Bally-DOS, that's 3, RF modulator. Oh, okay, here's a blank one. Sorry about that, I got confused. There's, RF modulator, don't know what this is all about. Some stuff from Ernie Sands, some programs. Oh, here's a newsletter from 1979 for, I think, the Apple. This is available. It had a small section on the Bally in here, if I recall correctly. Yeah. Man, I miss the days of, look at that. I miss the days of being able to, here's a map, come here, show up on whatever day they had their meetings, go into the university hall, and you'll meet a whole bunch of people who are like-minded and have a Bally or some other system that you own, and you can talk to us and we'll chat with you. And we'll do some demonstrations, and we'll, that kind of stuff, fun stuff. So that's that. That doesn't look like it's really RF modulating, excuse me, I keep thinking it's RF modulation, but this one is not labeled at all, is it? So the final one we'll cover is the one that says RF modulator, and I'm not sure what's in here, but we will find out. And this one seems to just be one, I don't know. This seems to be general information about RF modulation. And it's kind of incredible how much information people had to work their way through before computers could be built. I mean, I say that as if no one understands that, but obviously everyone knows that. But even in the early days of computers, people who wanted information really had to seek it out, and there was a lot to absorb. There's a lot to absorb. If anyone has any comments, please leave them. I appreciate you guys watching, and I will get together with you next time in my next video where I'll cover these 5 folders, or maybe not all of them, but some of them. Thanks for watching.